The Wall is the third book in the second trilogy, the City of Victory trilogy, and the sixth book overall of the story of Ferox that began with Vindelander, and we'll see. At the moment it's the culmination of that story. Whether or not I'll do any more, either going back to fill in some of the gaps or taking him on, we'll see. But this is a story in three parts, because it begins in 117, at the time of the death of the Emperor Trajan, when Hadrian finally gets his ambition and becomes emperor, but the circumstances in which he becomes emperor and the subsequent arrest and deaths of several prominent senators meant that there was always a stain on Hadrian's memory. It's the Senate, it's the elite of the Roman world that get to write the histories, and Hadrian has killed some of their own, which means that they never quite forgive him. Hadrian is not presented in a positive light in most ancient sources, which is quite a surprise to us because we tend to think of him as a good emperor, as a decent man, as someone who ruled well. So we've got that first of all, but we also begin back in northern Britain. Ferox has finally managed to get home. He's finally reunited with Claudia Enica, though she's still busy trying to make herself Queen of the Brigantes and get accepted by the Romans. They're both older. Claudia Enica doesn't seem to have aged very much. She's just that sort of girl, and Ferox is more of the cantankerous old so-and-so he's always been, but he's genuinely getting a little bit older. He is now well into middle age. He's got children who are in their teens or older, and he's not quite sure how to deal with that because he's been away most of the time. You know, he hasn't been the best of fathers because he hasn't been there. So we've got that domestic side. We've also got the problem with Ferox that he gets bored easily, and if he's bored, he broods, and then he tends to turn to drink and he tends to misbehave. So it's fortunate for him that things start to kick off, that even before the news of Trajan's death arrives, there's trouble on the frontier, he gets caught up in it, he gets captured by some raiders, but he has to fight his way out. He ends up going to a sacred shrine of the tribes and gets involved in a ritual duel, so we've got all sorts of that heroic Iron Age stuff going on as well, but it will lead on to other things. The background to this book is, of course, the building of Hadrian's Wall. And I've worked on the basis that has an idea that's been developed in the last few years when it became known that Hadrian visits Germany before he comes to Britain, and the German frontier, and there they build not a wall but a long stockade, a sort of palisade of big timbers. And those timbers, some of them have now been dated to make it clear they were felled several years before Hadrian arrives, which means there's a very good chance that he comes not to see an open patch of land and say, right, build me a stockade here, or when he gets to Britain, yeah, great place, build me a wall, that actually he's already sent the instructions for this and he comes to inspect work that's already underway. So we have that start of the process that will lead to Hadrian's Wall. We also have the context of an expedition, of a misadventure for the Romans that, again, is something that's hinted at in the sources, but there's so little detail, we really don't know what was going on, who was involved, why it all happened. So I've had to invent a lot of things from that, and some of you who are interested in other periods of history, particularly military history, might soon recognise the setting for the campaign and how it all plays out, although it's fairly loosely based on a particular battle from 1879 in southern Africa. And then eventually in part 3 we'll get to 122 when Hadrian comes to Britain himself. So again we get to see Roman London because Hadrian will be there, but particularly we go and see some of the wall sites. And I've tried to tie it into places you can go and visit today. So for instance we've got Poltros Burnmile Castle, things happen there, and the stretches of wall to the west of there. So we've got places where you can go and look, and I spent a happy few days a couple of years ago tramping around these, not thinking so much as an archaeologist, but thinking as a novelist, okay, if I'm here, what can I see? What would the landscape have been like in 122? What's open, what's visible, what's not? And that ties into wider questions. We've discovered that a lot of the area on which Hadrian's Wall was built had been deforested before, long before, and it's already under plough. But other sections, in the central section around Byrd Oswald, were still forested, so had to be cleared. And it comes into all the theories scholars have developed as to the order in which the wall was built. Because they don't just start at one end and work their way across, or start at both ends and work their way to the middle. We can tell from the archaeology that Hadrian's Wall takes quite a while building. There are gaps in the seasons, that particular teams do different things. So it's given me a chance to play around with lots of ideas, because in the end, as I've said before, as a novelist, you can't just say, well, we don't know how they did this. something has to happen in the story. You have to plump down for some interpretation. And I've tried to do that in a way that's convincing, that makes sense, and explores some of the possibilities, as well as weaving it into a story of Ferox, of Vindex, of Claudia Renica, of Bran, and of Hadrian, and of others who featured in this second trilogy. So this pulls things together, resolves lots of the threads that have been going on for a while, brings back the villainous Socius, who's appeared in the fort and the city, and leads to a culmination that again is summing up the Ferox saga. It isn't quite perfect, but it could be a lot worse. Which is that sort of gloomy Silurian, perhaps it's because I live in South Wales, I've grown up there, this is home. I have this sense that there is a sort of a pleasure in seeing the black side of things, the dark side of things, the miserable things, almost enjoying being sad, that is characteristic of the Welsh, but they're very good at dealing with it, and it seems to make them more successful. And I wonder whether the Siluries then were a little bit like us now. So that's our story, but that's the end of Ferox's tale, at least for the moment, but we'll see how things develop. The next novel to come out is something a little bit different, but we'll talk about that next year when it's nearer the time of its release.